Hello, good morning and welcome to this video on how to take off, fly, use the autopilot and to use ILS and land the standard Boeing 747 jumbo jet on Flight Simulator X. Here, as you can see, I've started up Flight Sim. I've selected the standard Boeing 747-400. For the current weather, I've selected clear skies because I don't want weather to get in the way of the demonstration that I want to show you today. So clear skies, negligible weather. For the location, I'm using Stansted, which is one of the lesser known London airports. The runway is long enough for the jumbo jet to be able to take off and land, and that's what we need. The first thing that I want to do is to go down here to the multi-function display. You can see on here that the course heading that we're set on at the moment is set to the heading of our runway, which is 45 degrees in this instance. So take a note of that on a piece of paper because this will become important to us in a minute. Also, with 45 degrees there, you can also change this course setting here. Now, the only reason I'm changing this is to act as a reminder to me of the heading of the runway. It's not useful for anything else for what I'm going to show you. So skip this step if you want, but for me it's a handy reminder of the direction of the runway. And unusually for FSX, all you need to do here is to put your pointer over the top of the reading on the MFD and then use your mouse wheel to scroll through until you get the right heading that you want. So here we are. I've got my course now indicating 045 degrees, which is the heading of the runway. With this done, I'm going to scooch over here to our autopilot main switches and options, and I'm going to dial in a speed of 240 knots. Now, there's no right or wrong speed to do this at. I guess 240 just seems to work well for me. So that's what I'm going to dial in. And again, I'm using the scroll wheel on the mouse to set that speed. That's done. That's good. The heading I'm going to set to the heading of the runway, which of course is 045 degrees. Now, having done this, I usually find it helpful, because we're going to fly a race course circuit, to note down the headings that I want to put the aircraft on when I fly the circuit. So what we do is we change 90 degrees for each separate leg of the circuit. So we're starting at 45. The next leg that we'll want is 135 degrees. After that, 225 degrees. Then 315 degrees, and finally back on to 45 degrees. It's very simple to do the maths, of course. You're just adding 90 degrees every time. However, when you're caught up with all the stuff that you might need to do inside of a flight, it might be handy just to write these down somewhere so it's a quick and easy way for you to remember which headings to go on to. With that done, I'm going to dial in a vertical speed of 1,800 feet, which is fairly standard. And I'm going to set my altitude to be at least 1,000 feet above the aerodrome level. And if I look down here, I can see I'm currently at 480 feet. So I'm going to round that up and make this 2,000 feet, the altitude that we're going to fly the circuit at. So that set the speed, the heading, the vertical speed and the altitude. I'm going to come over here and click the heading button. Notice when I do that, that the flight director switch comes on automatically. Perfect, just what we need. And if I now come over, I'm going to press this button, which is the altitude hold switch. And you may have noticed automatically that this also set the vertical hold switch on as well. Perfect, just what we need. I'm now going to take a look at the map for our airport. Now, the reason I'm doing this is because I need to find out what the frequency is for the ILS for this runway. So I'm just going to zoom in a few times on the airfield and then just click on it. The first one that comes up here says it's a Cat 3 ILS instrument landing system stroke DME, which is the distance measuring equipment for runway 05, and the identifier for runway 05 is India Sierra Echo Delta. And with that selected, click the OK button, and now you'll also get the frequency for the instrument landing system. And we definitely need a copy of this, so scribble that down on a piece of paper as well. Okay, with that done, we're back to our aircraft now, and I'm going to come down here to the radio stack, and I'm going to dial in the correct frequency for the ILS, which is 110.5, and then click to switch this frequency to the active. Now before I do that, I'm just going to scroll up a little bit quick, because when I click on it, watch what happens to the readout on the MFD here. And now you can see that it's showing, it's tuned in to ISED, which is the identifier for our ILS. It's showing the frequency that we're on as well. So that's all set and we are good to go. So believe it or not, that really is all that we need to do. Just to give you a quick briefing about what's going to happen, in a minute I'm going to switch on the auto throttle by flicking this switch. And once I've done that, I'm going to hit the speed button for the autopilot, and it's going to do everything it needs to do with the throttle, so we don't need to worry about a thing. I'm going to set the flaps in a moment as well to the takeoff angle. Now I usually do this by using the function keys or the selected key that I have on my joystick. You can of course come down here and change the lever yourself if you want by cycling through the seat positions till you're in the first officer's seat and doing it manually, or by using the function keys. But I'm going to set them to 20 degrees for takeoff. Notice the readout here and here updates to show I've got 20 degrees selected, and the white indicator is coming down towards the 20 to show that the flaps are staging to the requisite angle, and they are now deployed. So we're just about ready to take off now. What I'm going to do just before we go is to switch the auto throttle on and then press the speed button for the autopilot. Now the speed and the auto throttle is kind of disconnected from the autopilot. So although I haven't set the autopilot yet, other than some of these settings up here, the auto throttle and the speed works independently of the autopilot in the simulator. I don't know if that's true in the real aircraft. I've never flown it. I've only ever flown through the simulator. So with those two set, the aircraft will start to trundle down the runway, and once we reach about 150 knots, I'll pull the nose back, and about 180 knots it'll lift off the ground. Once we're clear of the ground, I'll raise the undercarriage, and once I've done that, I'll enable the autopilot. Now there's a little vagary here with the 3D view of the cockpit, in that the autopilot engage button over here does not work. I'm sure this catches a lot of people out. It certainly caught me out when I first started to try to fly this aircraft. The magic, the tip, the secret, if you like, is the Z key, or the Z key for our American colleagues, on your keyboard. So tapping the Z key will enable or engage your autopilot. Tapping it again will disengage the autopilot. So I think we're just about ready to go. So I'm going to hit the auto throttle to on, press the speed button, and you should find down here the throttles are starting to move forward. I'm not doing anything with any of my keyboard or joystick here. It's all being done via the auto throttle and the speed. Now as we're coming up to 90% engine power, I'm going to release the brakes, and off we go. What I'm looking for is a speed of 150 here before I start to pull back on the nose. Don't need to do any steering down the runway or anything. It all seems to have been set up wonderfully by the flight simulator, so I'm just waiting for 150 to come before I pull back on the stick. There we go. It's a lumbering beast, this. Don't expect to immediately leap off the runway because you won't. Okay, we're up now though. Positive rate of climb, gear up, and now I'm going to hit Z, which is the autopilot, and I can release the joystick. And so there we are. We're off, we're running, everything's going just fine. So I'm going to wait until we're about 1,000 feet above the ground, which is going to show 1,500 on the altimeter here. And then I'm going to turn on to my next heading, which will be 135 degrees. So there we are, we're about the right height. Oops. Be careful with the scrollers, because once you go past a certain point it seems to go crazy and jump up in 20s or 30s of degree rather than just the 1 or 2 that you had started with. Okay, so that's set the heading correctly. We're turning onto our new heading. The speed has gone over a little bit, it's starting to slow down. And the altitude is levelling off at about 2,000, which is exactly what we want. Now I'm going to leave the flaps down during this circuit just for ease of use to show you how this stuff works. Ordinarily, of course, I'm sure pilots would be tidying up the aircraft and raising the flaps, saving on fuel and all that wonderful stuff. I'm not going to do it here just for the sake of simplicity. So you recall that we set the speed to 240 knots here, and yet at the moment the aircraft's doing 256 knots. The throttles are being pulled back, as you can see here, by the autopilot or by the autothrottle, but because this is just such a big aircraft, it seems to take ages for it to respond, even to input from the computer systems on the aircraft. So heaven knows what chance any of us would have if we were trying to fly this manually. Okay, so we're coming along quite nicely now. I'm going to turn onto the downwind leg of the circuit shortly. I'm using that airfield there as a little indicator to me that I want to turn about now. So the heading I want to turn onto now is 225, so let's do that. Again, watch out for it suddenly jumping up in the numbers as you dial in your heading. And there we go. Now while it's doing its thing, we're going to set ourselves up with the GPS, because I want to use that to help me to line up with the runway when I come into land. So the magic key combination in our 3D view here is Shift 3. That will bring up the GPS. I'm going to move it to the top left of the screen, and I'm going to resize it. So it's not really obstructing our view or anything, or what we're trying to do. Now this is the airfield that we just took off from, Stansted, and if I look out the right side of the aircraft I should be able to see Stansted, although because we're quite far away from it I'm not entirely sure that we will see anything yet. We'll have a quick look over. Notice that the zoom level on my GPS is currently set to 10 miles. So there's our aircraft, there is Stansted, airport should be off to the right, and there it is there actually, there's a cluster of buildings. Not immensely clear, easier to see at night time when the runway lights are on, or indeed of course if we were at a higher altitude, but that's where we're going to be aiming for. Let's take a look at our instruments. So we're 248 knots and dropping down to a lesser speed. We're at 2,000 feet. Which is perfect. Let's have a quick talk about some of the indicators that we have showing on our displays. Over here on the MFD, this purple line represents the runway, which of course is off to our right, so that's showing us perfectly where it is. This little diamond down here is showing us our horizontal positioning in relation to the runway, which becomes important when we start our approach to land. This diamond up here shows our position relative to the glide slope, and again this becomes important as we start our approach to the runway. These same indications, the diamond and the triangle, are indicated here on the pilot's flight display. So you can see that kind of maroon indicator here, and the maroon diamond showing up here on the primary flight display. So they're going to be useful to us. They will show us where we are on both the horizontal plane for the landing system and also the vertical plane or glide slope for the landing system. Okay, we're coming along quite nicely. This fantail here is the runway that we're going to be landing on, of course, and what I generally do is wait until that fantail disappears just under the edge of the GPS here before I make my next turn. Looking ahead, we can see some red lights over there, which is for a different airport. That will be EGSX. That's a good waypoint for me to use as well as an indicator for where I should turn. So everything's coming along quite nicely. There's the fantail just dropping away off of the edge of the GPS display. The next heading I want to turn onto is 315. So I'll start that turn now. And there we go. And I'm also going to dial the speed down now to 180 knots. Now, because the autopilot on this has a hard time keeping up with such a large aircraft and trying to do so much, it's as well not to ask it to do too much at one time. So at the moment I've asked it to change course and I've asked it to reduce speed. So I'm asking it to do two things. That's kind of okay. But when I was trying to set up this demo, I asked it to change course, to lower the speed and to lower the altitude as well, and that caused quite a severe degree of concern, which ended up in my aircraft getting a lot closer to the ground than anticipated, long before I was anywhere near the runway. So maybe ask it to do two things at a time, but not three, would be my advice. So I'm turning on now to 315 degrees. There's the fantail, and now I'm going to adjust the range on my GPS because I need to gauge the point at which I can make the turn onto that fantail, and I want to get it as close as possible. This has everything to do with the strange way that the ILS system works on the FSX implementation of the jumbo jet. To give you an idea, I'm just going to go to the world map. Now you can see here, this is the airfield we took off from. Let's zoom in a bit, see if we can make this a bit clearer. There's the airfield we took off from. There's when we made our first turn. Here's where we made our second turn. And we flew the downwind leg and we turned pretty much over the airfield, which I showed you. And now we're turning down onto this leg here. Now what I need to do is to time the point where I'm going to turn right towards the fantail to make my landing. Now the reason this is important is because if you just kind of leave the aircraft volleying out here and then expect the ILS to pick you up and you're going to fly it all automatically, your jumbo jet will start to oscillate quite wildly from left to right as it tries to capture the localizer beam to land. And it will do this to such a large degree that it's almost impossible for it to settle itself down so it can land in good time. So what we try to do is to turn on to an extended centerline from the runway, which is in line with that fantail, as close as we can before we ask the autopilot to engage to do the landing. Now if we time it right, this will work wonderfully. You might need to take a couple of goes at it, but practice makes perfect, I'm sure. So let's have a look. I need to probably let this go for, I don't know, maybe 30 seconds or so before I try and turn onto the fantail. Let's see how we do. I've done this a few times now and I've got it right for about half of the time. So if this all goes horribly wrong, then it's not massively unusual, and if it goes right, I guess I managed to flip the coin on the plus side. Just taking a quick look at my instruments here. The airfield is absolutely where I would expect it to be. Everything's looking good. Zoom set to 5 miles. The fantail's creeping down the screen towards me now. So any moment now I need to make that final turn onto the runway heading, which of course is 45 degrees. Alright, let's do it now. Oops, there we go, overshooting again. There we go, so that's the heading, correctly set. Let's see how we do with the fantail. Did I start the turn too early? Difficult to say at the moment. Okay, doesn't seem to be too shabby. Seem to be lining up quite nicely on that. And we're rolling out now, so that's going to be fairly good, I hope. So at this stage now, I'm going to hit G for the undercarriage. Or of course you could just press the undercarriage lever here and wait until the gear indicator shows that the gear is down. There we are, it's down. That's all good, and now finally I'm lining up with the fantail. Hit the approach button over here. This is the bit that tries to lock on to the localizer, which will give us our horizontal line up on the runway. And notice it's doing a fairly big turn to the left here. The runway's heading is 4-5 and it's turned me on to 37 degrees and it's still turning 36. This is part of the problem because it's such a large aeroplane and it's trying to get itself onto the localizer beam as if it were some kind of a small single-engine aircraft or something. And of course this causes problems with something that's just quite so large. Hopefully it won't be too wobbly a left and right ride as it gets itself onto the localizer beam. As well as getting on the localizer, of course, it will start to track the glide slope. And when this magenta coloured diamond comes down towards the centre of the screen here, indicating that we have hit the glide path, the aircraft should start a steady descent towards the runway. Here is the diamond showing over here as well. Maybe easier to see. It's just starting to drop down now, meaning that we're getting close to intercepting the glide slope. When it hits that line, we're on the glide slope, and we should see the aircraft dip down automatically. There we go. So it's dipping down. It seems to have got, looking at the GPS, it's got the horizontal situation all sorted out, which is perfect. As I look at the runway ahead, it's not looking too shabby at all. And the indicator down here shows that, well, actually the localizer beam is slightly off to the right, so the aircraft probably needs to adjust itself a bit. And there it goes, doing precisely that. But we shouldn't need to make any severe adjustments now to our horizontal position. It's intercepted the glide slope quite well and it's adjusting the height for that okay. That's looking good. There's the PAPI, the precision approach indicator. Colours at the moment seem to be showing both white and red, so that's a good indication that everything is bang on track. So we're coming down towards the runway, not long till we touch down on it now. I don't need to do anything so far. But once I do get near the runway, I need to switch off the auto throttle and switch off the autopilot. If I don't do that, the auto throttle will try to speed the aircraft up and take off again. So you need to make sure that that's disengaged, otherwise we're never going to stop on the runway. So we're getting nice and close. I'm going to disengage the autothrottle and cut back on the power levers, take off the autopilot, lift up the nose a little bit, and we're down. So I didn't lift the nose soon enough. As soon as I touch down, everything's going fine. Just tap on the brakes and hold the brakes in. I'm sure this has probably overcooked the brakes on the real jumbo jet, but this is only a simulator. Nobody will be harmed in the making of this video. Once I get down to about 30, I'll take the brakes off and then try and set the throttle to keep me at about 30 miles an hour, and then I can make the exit off the runway at the appropriate point. I'll shut down the GPS window now because I don't need that anymore. Quick look around, and turning off here looks like a good idea. So and there we are. That's how to do a takeoff, fly a circuit using the autopilot. Use the GPS to help you to line up for the runway for when you come back, and how to use the ILS and land the standard Boeing 747 jumbo jet in FSX. I hope that's useful. Please leave me a comment if you'd like to, and if you've got any tips on how I could improve this video, or for any of the other viewers who might want to have a go at taking off and landing the jumbo jet themselves, please do so. I'm very much keen to learn from all of my fellow flyers. Thanks very much.